just in case you didn't know what room you're in, this is Dr. Upal is in Healthcheck Your Site. Are there any note takers in the room? Okay, this presentation has links in it, so that you don't need to write down every single URL that you see. And it is already online at github.io, healthcheck-your site. Please take a moment to write down the URL or open it in your browser. Give me a thumbs up when you're ready. Got 1, got 2, got 3, and 4 and 5. Okay, cool. All right. So you might be wondering, who is this weird person in front of you? Why are they yelling at you at 11 o'clock in the morning? Do they get that excited in the morning when they have a boarding pass to a business trip? The answer is yes. I am Tess, Flynn, otherwise known as Socket Wench. That is Wench, not Wrench. I am a module maintainer, blogger, and educator, and I am a DevOps engineer at 10.7. 10.7 is a full-service Drupal web agency. We create and care for Drupal-powered websites. We're based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, mostly. We are a fully distributed virtual company. Tell us about your project no matter where you're at. We want to work with you. If you're looking for work, talk to us. We might want to work with you. That's great. We do a number of different services. We do site hosting and migration, Drupal 8 upgrades, site audits. Site audits. And process consultancy. Give us a hi at the wonderful humans at 10.7.com. So, you're all probably sitting there thinking, okay, now that the high energy intro is over, like, okay, but Tess, my site is fine. Nothing's wrong with it. Well, see, the truth is that every site is healthy until it isn't. Let's have an example. One morning, your stakeholder is working with your site, and they are having a bad day because something is wrong with the site. So they go and they drag the nearest developer into their office, sit them down, and they say, hey, this feels slow and it feels off. Can you go and look into it? And of course, the developer goes, yeah, sure, yeah, we'll go look into it. And as they walk away back to their desk, all sad and morose, knowing that they're going to have a very hard day, they realize that they already have looked into it, and they still don't know what's wrong with it. And if only they had a little bit more help, they might be able to figure out what's going on. And this is where an auditor can come in and help you with your site. There's a number of different reasons to health check. You might be experiencing errors on your site. There might be breakage in functionality. You may even have malicious content being posted. In general, you might also have just poor performance. That's a very good reason to health check as well. And sometimes you have weird additional conditions. Like you might be working one day, everything's fine, and then some manager comes to you and said, hello, this is your site now. You're going to work on it, like a little orphan on your doorstep. You have no idea what the site is, who its history is, or what anything is about it, and you don't have any clue what's going on with it. And that's a good time to health check as well, because you need to get as much history and detail about that site as possible. So, what about other things? You might be working with your site and go, wait, is it supposed to do that? And then you start having a really bad feeling that something might be really terribly wrong. Now, a feeling isn't a health check, but it can be a sign that you might need one. Another possibility is that you might be working with your site with your team, and your team goes, wait, are we sure we even built this site the right way? I call this smoke testing. Smoke testing is actually a term from electrical engineering. It's where you actually assemble a circuit for the first time, and then you power it up. And if the magic smoke doesn't release, your test is good. I like it instead of sanity checking because my version involves explosions. Smoke testing allows you to check if you are on the right path. And it can be difficult to do in-house because you are subject to in-house bias. You work with your site every day. You are used to its weird quirks. You are used to the weird ways that it's built. You might not know that, and you might not see that as visible when you're actually working with it day to day. Also, throughout all of this, it is better to know and plan than to just hope for the best. You don't want to be in a situation where your primary site, that is revenue generating, that's been up for 7 years, and nobody knows how to access it, nobody knows how to update it, because everyone who was involved with that site has left years ago. And you're just paying the hosting provider, hoping that things are going to just work out. That's a bad situation, and you don't want to be in it. So you might think, Tess, I think my site works fine. What are you talking about? But I don't quite know. There's this little iota of doubt that I've just sown into your minds. Maybe it's not exactly healthy either. Are there things that I can do to check right now as I am sitting in this presentation? The answer is yes. Let's talk about checking the basics. The first and most important thing you do is check for updates. Yes, really, updates. It sounds ridiculous. We have been harping on this for years, but it is in fact the most basic, most important thing that you can do to maintain the health of your Drupal website. To check for updates. How do you check for updates? You can use the update report. Admin reports available updates. Now what happens if you can't find it? Well, in that case, you might need to enable the Update Manager module. The Update Manager module is going to provide that report for you. On production sites, this may in fact be disabled. This can actually be a good sign because it means that your site might be maintained by a web development team who is fully apprised of the status of the site. So it's good to check if it's enabled or not. If you don't have a web team, you can enable the module by going to Admin Extend and updating and enabling the Update Manager. Now, once you go ahead and enable it, you might get a bit of a shock because if you haven't done it for a while, if you haven't checked that report for a while, oh, that's not good. Oh, geez. Oh, that's a lot of red on that screen. Oh. Okay. Don't panic. Your site will probably not be a sea of green. There will no doubt be a lot of different modules which are out of date or unsupported. That is normal, particularly with sites that haven't been managed for a very, very long time. You do want to look for red entries. These are the highest priority entries in that entire report. These include security updates, unsupported modules, and then you want to take action as soon as possible. Action, not update. Why? Because a lot of sites actually have out-of-date modules on purpose. Some sites will break if modules are updated. Particular modules might be updated. Because those modules have been modified, they might rely on deprecated functionality, or you might have built around functionality that no longer works the same way in a new version. So check that very carefully. Always ask your web development team first before you update anything. Is there anything else that we can check? Sure, there's the status report. The status report provides an overview of your site. You can find it under Admin Report Status. Again, you want to look for red entries. These indicate misconfigurations if updates are required, down connections to external services. Also, you want to check your caching configuration. Go to Admin Configuration Development Performance. When you go to that page, you'll want to check for your caching best practices. Make sure that your CSS and JS files are aggregated. Also that your page cache maximum age is not none. Now this is most sites. Some very advanced sites will have external caching mechanisms where it is intentionally disabled. Or you might have a lot of user-generated content that needs to be available as soon as it is posted. In those cases, caching is intentionally disabled as well. So keep that in mind. Also, then you can check your logs. Don't look for specific errors in the logs, but instead look for the frequency of severe errors. I like saying this: you don't want to look at the stones. You want to look for the mountains. You want to see what the landscape is like of the errors in your logs. If you're getting frequent enough errors of a regular pattern, that indicates a problem that you can resolve. If you get incidental errors once in a while that are very infrequent, it might not be worth looking into. How do you look at the log? You can use the database log. DB log is enabled for most sites, and you can find it under Admin Reports, Recent Log Messages. So that's a lot of stuff that we've just covered. Is there anything else that we can cover? Sure, there's tons of stuff. We can cover bad practice modules, unused themes and modules. We can check the number 404s and blah, use caching, duplicated content, blah, 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 blah. Okay, there's way too much stuff here. There's way too much stuff to keep track of it all. We are not NASA engineers in the 1960s standing next to a 6-foot-high checklist of things to check the health of our site. We have other things to do. We want to be lazy. We want the computers to do the work for us. There's an easier way. Let's talk about automating our checks. First and foremost, there's the site audit module. This is an old workhorse module. It's been around for quite some time. It gathers data and runs best practice checks. You can find it at drupal.org/project/site audit. Now, this is not a real module. This is, in fact, a drush command for the Drupal 7 version. I think there was motion on the Drupal 8 version to do something different, but I lost track of that. So you need the drush command line tool in order to run site audit. So to install that, you want to go to docs.drush.org/en/master/install for a complete list of how to install drush. To install site audit for Drupal 7, you want to do drush en-y site audit and then cc drush, cache clear drush. And the reason why is, again, this is a drush command, not a Drupal module. So what's that look like? Log into your server on SSH, install the module, change to the directory that has your site, and then issue drush AA and then all of these parameters, and then pipe that out to a file to store, in this case, path2report.html. And what's that look like? It looks like this. There's a lot of stuff in here. A lot of stuff in here. Multiple pages of it. So how much of it do we have to, read? When I look at the site audit report, I usually read the best practice checks first. These are the most important checks and the most highest value checks throughout the entire report. And they're right there at the top. So it's really handy and really important for you to read them all. Also, I like examining the caching settings because these are going to bring you the best performance value for small sites. Again, consider that page cache maximum age very, very carefully depending on the kind of traffic your site experiences. Also, the site audit report bundles in all of the status and updates checks, the same data that's on the update manager page and the status report page. And you can do this all with one command without having to log in because we're using a drush command. Now, what else can site audit do? It can do tons of stuff. It can do content checks. In my opinion, this is more FYI than problem finding, and it does not replace a proper content audit. It also can provide several different technical stats to you, such as your files, the number and size of your file uploads directory, the size of your site code, the DB table sizes. These can be useful, but in my opinion, they're more indicative of a potential problem than indicative of a problem itself. If one table is, for example, 10 gigabytes and everything else is a couple meg, that might be a problem that we need to investigate. So site audit's pretty great, but what about Drupal 8? So for Drupal 8, I would recommend the Healthcheck module. This is a new module. It's not a drush command. And instead of running it as point reports once in a while, it monitors your site continually in the background and has a pluggable notification system in order to communicate to you as soon as a problem occurs. Currently, this is in beta, but mostly it's because I haven't finished writing all the tests yet. How do you install Healthcheck? You install it like any Drupal 8 module, compose a require Drupal/Healthcheck, then enable it like any other Drupal module. Nothing special. Then you can go and run the ad hoc report. You can go to Admin Reports, Healthcheck, and this will give you an action-oriented, priority-ordered report. This is different from the site audit module, which gives you everything by category, best practice, caching, so on. In Healthcheck, everything is, this is the most critical thing you need to pay attention to right now. These are less critical. These are probably fine, and so on. And it looks like this. You get a nice, beautiful dashboard of what the health status of your site is. And you can examine and filter all of the different reports. Also, it has email notifications built in, so you can get these health checks sent directly to your inbox. These are customizable messages that you can tailor to your site, and you can include full reports or just critical report items. Here's what an example looks like. Also, also can do historical reporting as well. You can monitor how your site improves over time. This is views-based and it is customizable so that you can actually tailor it to your site yourself. And again, this is what it looks like. This is just, again, an example. It's very simple, but you can customize this to look as beautiful as you'd like. And if you'd like to help us out work on health checks, because health checks is fully pluggable, you can write your own health checks really easily, specific for your site, so that if there are any issues that are specific to your site, you can plug them into health checks and leverage the same kind of notification system. Help us out at drupal.org/project/healthcheck. All right. So we've got site audit and we've got health check, and we're all done, right? I can just leave. I don't need to be here anymore. Hey, grab my luggage. I have to go to the airport. Oh, darn it. There's still more slides. All right. So what's wrong? That server's on fire. That's not good. Let's talk about infrastructure checkups. The first question I like asking people is, where are you hosted? A lot of people are going to be on one of different tiers of service. They're going to be either on shared hosting, on managed hosting such as Pantheon or Acquia, or self-managed hosting like a virtual private server, a DigitalOcean or a Linode, or internal hosting. If you're like a government, a school, a hospital, and subject to certain privacy regulations, you might be hosting it internally on your own dedicated on-premises hardware. That's important to know. So I like asking where you're hosted. And then the next question I like asking people is, are you still happy with it? Now, it's weird when we're starting with an infrastructure checkup and I'm asking these very human, very touchy-feely questions, because these are actually the most important questions I could ask. Because the tech doesn't matter nearly as much as how you feel about it. If you're not happy with it, that's a problem, and you should look at it. So when I ask, if you're still happy with your hosting, I usually ask then, what was your primary motive when you selected the hosting that you're currently on? Are you on shared hosting because you needed to keep costs down and shared hosting was cheap, and that's all your considerations were at the time? Was it that you would just use whatever the agency that developed your site gave you it on, and then you just kept it up because you didn't ever bother to re-examine that question earlier? Is that motivation still true today? Re-examine those decisions when you're doing a site audit. It's very important to know if that is still applicable to you right now. So you might not be a Linux wizard. Is there anything else that we can check for infrastructure right now? Any easy stuff? Sure. Let's check the easy stuff. Do we have enough memory? Now, how do you do that on a Linux server? Actually, it's pretty easy. We're going to use the free utility. And this is going to show used, free, and available memory on Unix-based servers. So we log into our server via SSH, and then we're going to execute the free -h command. The -h is kind of weird because Unix likes shortening everything because they don't like letters. They were Web 2.0 before 2.0 existed. And -h means human. So we want it in human terms, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, that sort of a thing. So when we issue free -h, we'll get this. And your eye immediately goes to the memro. The memro says, okay, that's probably what I'm looking for. That's memory. In fact, you're correct. That is, in fact, free physical memory. But then which column do you want to look for? The first thing that you'll probably think is, sure, I want to use the free column, right? Because that will tell me how much free memory I've got, right? And you are right. But Linux, like most modern operating systems, actually caches applications resident in memory for performance reasons. For this reason, the free memory column might lie to you. On particularly memory-constrained systems, like say if you only have 1 gigabyte of free memory, this might read only megabytes or kilobytes. And instead of freaking out, what you really need to do is look all the way to the other side of the page under the available column. The available column is going to tell you how much memory that you have free, including data that has been cached and can be easily cached out by the operating system on demand. In this case, we have 9 gigabytes free, so we have plenty of free memory. What about disk? Well, we can use the DF, or disk-free, utility. This measures free space, not performance of the disk. And it works kind of the same way, df-h, and it will show you a list of all the physical devices attached to the server. Now this is where we have to do a little bit of a fact-finding operation. Where is your site hosted? Is it under /var/www/html? If it is, which one under the mounted on column do we actually need to pay attention to? It's not dev, it's not run, it's not boot, so it's got to be / because that's where everything else is. And we can see under the use column, we have 35% free and 270 gigabytes available. So we've got plenty of space. What about CPU load? This is actually the last thing I usually look at, because nowadays we are very much in a CPU surplus, and a lot of the times we have more than enough CPU to run applications, especially if you're running on a virtual private server on a medium to low traffic site. How you can check CPU is by using the top utility. Now the top utility is going to output a lot of data, and you want to look for the idle or ID %. Different flavors of Unix display this a little differently, so it's important to keep that in mind. So this is what it looks like when you do run it, and it looks really noisy and really loud and really confusing. But we already know what we want to look for. We want to look for idle. And idle's way up here, and it says 96%. If we sit here and watch this for a few minutes, and it doesn't really ever peak all that much, we know that we have probably plenty of CPU. But this can be a bit of a trick, because this only measures how much CPU is being used now. This is not a historical command. So you have to monitor this continually throughout your busiest traffic hours and your lightest traffic hours, or use a third-party utility to measure this data. That can be very tricky. So CPU is something that's important, but I tend not to focus too much on it these days. Also, unlike the other two utilities, the top command does not immediately terminate once you've entered the command. It runs continuously. So to exit out of it, you have to hit the Q key. Okay. What if you're on managed hosting? Honestly, I don't even bother auditing the infrastructure for managed hosting. If you're on Pantheon or Acquia, I tend not to even give you more than a cursory look. And the reason why is because memory, disk, CPU are all typically auto-scaled on these platforms, congruent with your service tier. The real question is, are you on the right service tier or not? And that is a more human question than a technical one. Now, if you're on shared or self-hosting, on the other hand, you do need to think about infrastructure, especially if you're on shared hosting, because typically this is not a preferred way to run Drupal sites today. The next thing I usually check is the PHP version. This is particularly a problem when it comes to virtual private or self-managed servers. For Drupal 8, you should always be running some version of PHP 7, usually PHP 7.0.8 or higher. The higher, the better. For Drupal 7, you really should be running on PHP 7 as well. However, there are some cases where it doesn't quite work, some older sites that might have some weird incompatibilities. In that case, please, for the love of the universe, try to get yourself on at least PHP 5.6. 5.4 at the bare minimum. If you are on 5.3, that is an immediate red flag for me. And the reason why is because ever since PHP 7 became normalized within the Drupal community, a lot of coding standards have shifted towards PHP 7. And there have been many major module releases that actually broke versions of PHP older than 5.4. So please at least run 5.6. It's not supported anymore, but still it's better than older than 5.3. Please. Now you might think, okay, I'm on 5.6. I should get into this PHP 7 thing. I'll just update PHP. The honest truth is that PHP updates from 5 to 7 are really, really rare. You typically don't actually update these things. Most of the time, I usually suggest to people that it's better to move to new hosting entirely rather than to actually update in place. And the reason why is because usually if you're running a PHP 5 server, it's indicative that that particular hosting might be so old you might want to build a completely new server already or move to a different hosting provider. And that often becomes matched up with other concerns that I see on the human level of doing an audit. The next thing I also check is if the CLI version of PHP and the web version of PHP are the same. Now, I've seen some wild things with this in my time. Generally, you want the same major and minor version of PHP on both the command line when you use SSH and the web PHP when you go to the status report. If they're different than that, that's a problem. The configuration doesn't have to be exactly the same either because CLI and web have different concerns. Typically, like the maximum memory allocation is unlimited for the command line version, but strongly restricted on the web version. That's normal, and there are minor configuration differences like that that are okay. But I've seen some weird things, like I've seen a site running PHP 5.3 on the main web server. You go to the command line, it was running the newest version of 7.2. I've also seen the reverse, which was really strange. One of them was actually PHP 5.2. I have no idea how they did that and how it stayed that way for so long. So how do we check the version? Usually I like checking the web PHP version first because it's the easiest one. And I usually like doing it through the web UI, through the status report screen. Why? Because it's the same one that serves your request. It is going to be the most consistent way to get the web PHP version. So go to admin report status and search for PHP. It will show you the version number right there. What about the command line PHP? It's pretty easy. Log in via SSH, go to PHP, enter PHP space -- version, and it will output the version for you. Now, throughout infrastructure checking, you really want to remember that as your site grows, you can outgrow your hosting. Your site might require more resources or more features than you're currently giving it, in which case you might need to consider moving to hosting in order for your site to continue serving you well. So, what if we have another situation? We have a developer, they're under the gun to get a feature out the door, as we have all been in that situation, and they go, if I could just change this one line in core, my whole day will be so much easier and I'll get this finished. And of course, they decide to ignore their better nature and they decide to change it anyways because they want to be done with this week and go home and watch DS9 on Netflix. And the problem is that as soon as you do that, you also lie to yourself and say that, sure, I'll remember that I made this change the next time I update core. You won't remember. None of us remember doing this, but we've all done it. So let's talk about modded code. I call it mods and not hacks because we want to separate between things that are malicious and things that were intentional. Mods are not malicious. They're intentional modification of core and contrib code. Why do people mod core and contrib code? There's a number of different reasons. They might be under the gun, expediency. They might have lack of knowledge. They might just need to get something done right now and are unaware of the correct way of doing that particular feature. Or they might be trying to fix a bug in core or in a contrib module that has been plaguing them for the last week. And they are unaware of how to actually push that forward in the public issue queue. And often, developers might not necessarily be aware of the official patching process for a Drupal site. So we could, as auditors, ask if mods were used on a site. But honestly, people will forget it, and they might leave their job, so you won't be able to ask them. And they might not be using Git, so you might not be able to have that history anyways. So we need to find another way to actually look for those modifications. Fortunately for us, there's the hacked module. The hacked module compares installed core and contrib code against that on D.O. It is version aware so that you know exactly what's going on with it, and it will compare it very, very well. When should you use the hacked module? Whenever I audit a site, I always install the hacked module and run a check. But if you know your site particularly well, you should probably want to install it when you're using FTP and not Git or CI to deploy. When you haven't updated your site in ages, that's a lot of sites out there, or you suspect a security breach. Any of these particular cases, you probably should run the hacked module. How do you install it? Like any other Drupal module, Composer require Drupal/hacked, then enable it using Drush. And it's important to run this on your live server in situ. Why is that important? And the reason why we don't want to run it on our local server is because sometimes malicious content and hackers will actually create untracked or cloaked files within your web server that you will not be aware through your normal deployment processes. And those code can be compromised. If you try auditing what's in your repo and not what's actually on the web server, you might miss that, and that's important. How do you run the report? Go to Admin Reports Hacked. Now, the hacked module is pretty great, but it's also known for getting a lot of false positives. Any minor change can flag a module as being modified. This includes missing readmes, if line endings have been changed, or even if you make best practice changes like modding a particular config file or changing .ht access. All of those will actually get flagged as a modification. So be aware of that. So I ran hacked module on my website quite some time ago by judging the screenshot at this point, and you'll notice that there are 723 files that have been modified in Drupal core. That sounds like a lot, except that this is a Composer-based website, and this was built 5 minutes before I ran the report. All of those were line ending changes. So it's very important for you to inspect this with a critical eye to make sure that you're not getting false positives. How do you do that? You can get detailed results by installing the diff module. This will display individual line changes per project. So once we have the diff module installed and we rerun the hacked report, we'll get this nice little link that's going to be view details of changes right next to any flagged module. If we open that up, we'll see a list of files, so we can see which files were modified. If we click on a particular file, we can actually see the exact differences in that compared to the same version. That's on Drupal.org. And here we can see that a patch has been applied to this particular module, but it's not anywhere else. So we know what's going on with it. Once we've identified any modifications, how do we go legit? So we can create a patch from the changes that we found using the hacked module, and then we add those patch files to our repository. Now, if those changes have broad benefits, say a bug fix or a performance enhancement, you may wish to take that patch and post it to a Drupal.org issue for that particular project. This is important because if it has broad benefit, you want to give that work back to the community. If it doesn't, they might not accept it, but still there'll be a record of it somewhere. The right way to mod a site is to actually use for Drupal 8 the Composer Patches plugin within Composer. And then what you're going to do is, I like referring to the patch on Drupal.org if it's been posted. And the reason why is because the patch will also include a link to the URL part that refers to the issue related to that patch. And as a result, you'll be able to actually determine what the entire context of that patch was by examining the issue. Now, modding isn't wrong, but honestly, it needs to be done right. So, your stakeholder might be using your site, might be time to push some new content, and suddenly things go very, very wrong. The site starts taking a awfully long time to load. You might get this weird ad selling you knockoff sunglasses, and why is it trying to redirect you to a site in Uzbekistan? What's going on here? And then you get a bad feeling. What if we've been hacked? So let's talk about hacks. The name of the game for hacks is signatures. We want to look for clues that imply a hack. Typically for PHP web applications, it's going to be a combination of the eval function and base64 code. This is a common way to unpack and execute exploit code remotely. To scan a code for hacks, you can always use the hack report, but if you don't have access to that, you could use the grep utility, or if you have downloaded the entire site code locally, you could use your IDE in order to look for those signatures. Also, you want to look for duplicate files and modules. This is actually a common attack pattern with Drupal. One site that I once audited actually had an entirely duplicated version of the link module that was in an unexpected location. So it would have been completely easy to ignore if I only looked at the regular best practice module locations. And inside of that file was eval-base64 and a whole bunch of exploit code. So it's very, very important to actually check against the live server and search the actual live server code. You might say, Tess, should I just look at the logs for this stuff? Honestly, you could. Logs are useful to corroborate an attack, in my opinion, but not to detect one. And the reason why is because the internet is not a clean place. It is a public toilet. And the reason why is because today there is no movie hacker sitting behind a keyboard flailing like Hacker the Frog trying to break into your site. Instead, the modern pattern is that governments, foreign nationals, and cartels are going to use cloud hosting to do automated drive-by attacks to all of your servers. All you are is an IP address and a possible executable point to run exploit code. That is all you are to them. So if you become vulnerable, they will auto-hack you without them even knowing that they didn't, because no one's at the keyboard anymore. This is why when you go to your 404 page in Drupal, you'll often see wp-admin.php, because that's one of the most common ways of trying to break into an unprotected WordPress site. And if your site isn't WordPress, why are they trying to go there? That's because there's nobody at the keyboard. It's all script-driven now. Now, I hate giving people bad news, but when it does happen, I have to tell them that their site's been hacked, and I hate doing this to the sites. And when that happens, there's this terrible pregnant silence that happens. And then suddenly, oh God, we're all finished. The whole site's been hacked, we're over. This slide's great behind Carmina Burana, by the way. You should try that at home. All right, your site's been hacked. Don't panic. You want to breathe. And once we're calm, what can we do? The first thing I like telling people is take your site offline. I don't care if you're a Fortune 500 company. I don't care if you have money that's coming in left and right. I don't care if your users are going to be upset. Take your site offline. It is better to be offline than it is to be compromised. Because the reason why, the longer that you have a compromised site up, you risk user privacy, partner exposure, and continued brand damage. Take your site offline. Replace it with a static HTML site that you're doing site maintenance. But please do not keep it online and hope for the best. Take it offline. Then you want to back up the hacked site. You might go, well, it's hacked, we should just delete it. No. Back it up. You need to investigate what happened. What kind of organizational failure occurred that led to this hack occurring? So you need a working copy of your site to examine. Place it in an air-gapped system, either something running a Docker container, a virtual machine, or a dedicated laptop. Now, the reason why this is a bit of paranoia on my part, but some sites will actually call back to remote command and control networks in order to actually see what's going on. And if that happens, you don't want them to get the gist of what's going on. You want to lock that off. So place it on an air-gapped system. Then you want to figure out when you were hacked. This requires some sleuthing. Try to tie it to a missed module or core security release. Then try to find a clean backup. That includes the database, code, files from before the hack. Yes, even the uploaded files need to be returned to a backup state. Make sure that none of this stuff is compromised. Then update the clean backup. Apply all security updates and patches. Copy over content manually if you have to. And the reason why I say manually is because you want to make sure that none of that content itself has hacked code and malicious code in it. You want to make sure that every one of those is examined. Then back all of that up again, because you don't want to avoid rebuilding it a second time. And your site might still be exposed in other ways. What if you don't have a backup? In that case, clean up what you can and accept the risk of follow-up hacks. Now, your site might have been hacked, but what happens if the server itself was compromised? Someone got shell access. Someone got root access. In that case, my recommendation is throw it away. Really. Just throw away the entire server, assume that it is compromised, 0-byte the hard drive, and start over. Why? Because if you invalidate all the passwords and start over, you'll be able to apply good security practices from the start. You will not have old data lingering around, and that data could be compromised already anyways. Get a new server. Reinstall the operating system. Don't keep it around. It hurts, but it's the most secure method to do that. Delete the server. Start over. Remember that you will be hacked. There is no way to avoid it. My site has been hacked. Your site will probably be hacked if it hasn't already. But you can be prepared. Okay, so we've taken the site, we've restored it from a pre-hack state, updated everything. Now, what about all the other stuff that we found during the course of the audit? That's when we need to talk about remediation. So first we want to recover from the hacks, restore to a clean state, apply all security updates. Cool. Then, honestly, I like fixing all the easy stuff. That sounds lazy, but it's actually the most important, most effective thing I can do. Disable any bad practice modules, make best practice config changes. All of those can make huge benefit. They're small changes, but they can make a big difference. Some things I like pointing out that I don't like, statistics module. Don't use this. It's the DB, it writes to the DB on every request. You don't need it anymore. Use some other analytics system instead. If you're using the PHP module, don't. If this executes PHP code in content, it is an instant security vulnerability. Don't use the PHP module. In order to uninstall the PHP module from sites, you want to check all your text formats that use the PHP module. Fortunately, there are none. And then you want to make sure that you're not using any follow-up modules like the views PHP module. Please don't use that either. Test for breakage after you've removed the use of the PHP filter from all of these, then uninstall the modules. Also, you want to look for any duplicate modules, because if there are modules in multiple locations, this can be confusing and can cause missed updates because you thought you updated this module, but Drupal is looking at this module instead in a completely different directory. So again, that can be a sign of a hack. Update your deduplicate your modules. To deduplicate them, you want to remove the module, then use drush-cr and drush-updb. Again, test this locally first because you might break the site during the course of this. All right, that's all the easy stuff fixed, but your site might just be too gosh darn slow still. What's wrong with it? How can we find out what's slowing it down? Honestly, this presentation is about doing site auditing, not performance analysis. Performance analysis requires different tools and approaches. I tried talking about performance analysis in this, and it ended up being an hour and 20-minute talk. We don't have time for that today. So really, if you want to talk performance analysis, we could talk about that later. But it is a time and brain-intensive process. Also, remediation is a process too. Fixing all of these problems is not you're done, move on, life is good now. No, this is something that you continually have to work on during the life of your site. It's not a fix. It's something that you have to work on as part of your daily life. Okay, we've cleaned out all the hacks. We've removed all the bad practice modules. We've got everything all set up nice and great. And it's still not working well. What's going on with it? And then we notice that something's not right. And we ask, why was this site built this weird way? Well, you see, mistakes were made. It's not broken, but it's not working well either. Why does this happen? Well, it can happen due to inexperience. Sometimes we might have bad assumptions about what people require, how a particular module works, or our priorities for how we use the site have completely changed. As your site needs to change as you change, so that you need to make sure that your site grows with you. So what are some common problems? There's a lot of them, but let's cover some of the big ones. There might be too few content types. Articles on basic pages everywhere. Tons of fields, not all of them used. If your site looks like that, it might be a problem. You might also have the reverse problem, too many content types. The differentiation is only in the name, not in the use or data. What really is the difference on a website between press release and a blog post and a news post? Are these really different from an organizational perspective? Can't they be just the same thing? Really ask yourself that question. The thing is that content problems are really common, but they can be fixed. Rethink your content strategy. Do a content audit. Use card sorting to rediscover groupings. Drop old, irrelevant content. Then merge and split types. This can be done manually or using the migrate module. This can be done using per node tasks via the views bulk operations module. Then reorganize everything. Update your menus. Build new sections. Use path auto and redirect to keep your SEO. Once you have that, you might also have weird problems with layout. Like you're using full HTML everywhere and building tables and content. That's not good. Layout is not content. It gives your site a messy, inconsistent feel. There's a number of different layout managers that you can use instead. This separates your content from layout. There's a new one in Drupal 8 that's not in this presentation, but some of the ones that I also have used in other sites are paragraphs, panels, block visibility groups. And sometimes the problem is more than just content. Overuse and abuse of a feature can cause gradual performance loss. Often this is unaware or unintentional. And sometimes you might just look at all of this and go, maybe it's time for a new site. Your current site is old and unsupported. It might be cheaper and easier to rebuild and fix. Or this just might be the excuse that you're looking for to build a new site. And often I find that rebuilds are easier on staff. It's the rip the bandage off fast approach. Enforce best practices from start, because as soon as you have a new site, people might approach it with a new mindset so that they're not subject to their old patterns of use. And often you want to coordinate this with a hosting change. Also, don't go alone. You want to bring in external help in on a rebuild to offer outside perspective and broader experiences, and ask if they audit. It's a good get to know each other exercise. It informs better estimating. 10.7 does audits, by the way. We have flat pricing. We do analysis and recommendations. You'll get a huge document. The last one I wrote was 32 pages. Give us a hi at thewonderfulhumans@10.7.com. Always remember to look for the long term, because fast fixes bring brief benefit. I want to give one moment, I know that I'm over a minute here, to Flyover Camp for having me here today, for Tim Plunkett, Wiz1 Solutions for helping me out with this presentation, for 10.7 for supporting my time here, my wonderful patrons on patreon.com/socketwitch who support my tutorial and creative efforts, and you can find this presentation on github.io.